Good morning, everybody. This is your host, Aaron Tomlinson. Thank you for joining me for Sunday Morning Live. Did a online workshop, had some people online on a Zoom call yesterday, and some people live with us where we were doing it, talking about quantum healing, talking about healing that goes beyond just conventional medicine. And I want to state at the beginning, like I do every time I talk about this, I am very thankful for conventional medicine. Don't have any problems with conventional medicine. I just recognize that conventional medicine has limitations. And when we're seeking healing of any kind, we have other options in addition to that, or things that are available to us to help us. And invariably, that's going to lead into the topic of faith. So I'm going to give people a minute to jump on the live stream here. I'm going to check some settings and see if I can work with them, because I've been having some problems with that. Shocker, I know. And then we'll jump into this. We'll talk about healing. We'll talk about faith. We'll talk about faith as it's understood from a religious perspective, how it can become toxic for us, how it's misunderstood. And then I'll try and present some ways that we can reframe faith so that it is something that we can have access to, that can be a resource for us and be beneficial to us when every area of our life. So let me just take a minute and check some things here. I appreciate your patience. I want to see if I can share this a couple places on Facebook. Yeah, it just doesn't let me make it public anymore for some reason. So it only goes out to friends. So I'll have to change it and share it to the groups and stuff after. And if you're watching on YouTube, I appreciate it. I appreciate everybody that signed up for the class, everybody that's been so supportive in this new venture that I'm doing and taking, and I appreciate that. If you want to know more about how to support us, you can email me at aarontomlinson@gmail.com. I know there's a couple of you that have already emailed me. I think that will probably watch me more on YouTube than on Facebook, and I have seen those emails. I just, with preparing the class and doing the class, haven't had a chance to respond to those yet, but I plan on doing that this afternoon. So let's jump right in. Let me just see one more thing before I do that. Yeah, let's go ahead and just jump right in. So first thing I want to talk about is healing. When we talk about healing, when I talk about healing, I'm not talking about just physical healing, getting over a sickness or an injury or a physical problem that you may be facing. That's certainly a very big and important part of healing. But healing can also apply, obviously, to trauma that we've experienced in our life, being able to heal from trauma, being able to rewire our trauma responses, things like dissociation, things like being defensive, anxiety and depression can come along with a lot of unresolved trauma. And at the end of the day, the word trauma is just a fancy word to describe an injury. You have trauma units in hospitals, right? They deal with people that were in accidents or people who have serious injuries. They've been hurt. And when we talk about trauma from a mental and emotional standpoint, we're also talking about pain and injury. We're talking about emotional pain and emotional injury. And so from that perspective, mentally and emotionally, unhealed trauma is simply unhealed or unresolved emotional pain from events and circumstances that we've experienced in our lives. So healing obviously applies there as well. But I want to talk not just about healing, but about wellness. I think wellness is a term that we can use that is very holistic and that is all encompassing. And so we can look at any area of our life where we don't feel well. Obviously, if we're sick, if we're injured, we don't feel well. If we're struggling mentally and emotionally with anxiety or depression or unresolved trauma, then we don't feel well. By the same token, we can look at our finances, and if we're struggling financially, then we're probably not feeling well about our finances. And so we can bring, if we change it, just from healing to wellness, very few people talk about healing their finances, but in actuality, if you're doing well financially, then you're experiencing a level of wellness. If you're not doing well financially, then you're experiencing an area where you lack wellness, or we could say where you're experiencing excuse me, some level of discomfort or some level of pain. Same thing in relationships, right? If you have a intimate relationship that's not going well, friendships that aren't going well, or if you're just kind of isolated and away from people, perhaps you have some social phobias or some social anxieties, then you can also look at your relationships in your family, your relationships at work, your relationships with your friends, your relationships with other drivers when you're driving in traffic. That's also an area that we can talk about healing when we talk about it from this perspective of wellness. Now, there's conventional wisdom in all of these areas, and this conventional wisdom is very important. When we talk about conventional healing physically, I'm talking about our medical system, I'm talking about medicine, surgery, but I'm also talking about chiropractic, holistic practices that are based on nutrition or energy work. I'm talking about physical therapy. I'm talking about working out, exercising, taking care of yourself, eating right. All of that is conventional wisdom, and there's conventional wisdom in all these different areas, right? We have conventional wisdom for physical healing. There's conventional wisdom for improving your relationships, for improving your finances. All of that is very important. What I'm talking about when I'm talking about faith is never a substitute for conventional wisdom. If we reject wisdom on any level, we're by definition being foolish, because the opposite of being wise is being foolish. And so we want to avail ourselves to as much conventional wisdom as possible. And a lot of people in the church circles that focus really heavily on faith, on trusting God, on being submitted to the will of God or finding the will of God, oftentimes substitute their faith and while ignoring conventional wisdom. It's an either or thing. Either I'm trusting God or I'm trusting the arm of the flesh, right? There's scriptures in the Bible. There's one in particular that comes to mind. I think it's in Jeremiah, where he says, there's a verse that says, cursed is the man who trusts in the arm of the flesh. There's another place in Isaiah where it says, don't go down into Egypt. And we said, Egypt is a type of the world and worldly wisdom. Friendship with the world is enmity against God. Anybody who makes himself a friend of the world is an enemy of God, all that stuff. And yet Jesus also said that the children of this world are wiser in this generation than the children of light. And the book of Proverbs is full of admonitions to seek out wisdom, to make wisdom the principal thing. So we're never talking about faith as a substitute. So that's the first mistake that people make. They think that it's an either or thing. Either I'm trusting God or I'm applying conventional wisdom. I'm either trusting in the Lord with all my heart, leaning not unto my own understanding. Well, what if your understanding is correct? So we get ourselves stuck in this sort of linguistic either or category, rather than being more expansive in our approach and thinking in terms of the and both, that I can avail myself to conventional wisdom and conventional practices, and I can add a dimension that we can call faith into my life that can give me more resources to achieve or acquire or get the thing that I'm after, right? But again, faith is one of those slippery words. It's one of those words in the English language that we turn into a noun that really describes actions. It doesn't actually describe a person, place, or thing. It describes an abstract description of something that someone's doing, of a process, right? Rather than a person, place, or thing. And when we do that, we can sometimes have a hard time connecting the description, the noun in this case, back to the verbs, back to the actual actions or back to the processes. And so that's what I want to attempt to do today, is talk about faith. What is faith? How has it, or how can it become toxic, and how has it become toxic for a lot of people? And what can we do to redeem it? To redeem it by reframing it, I would say. So let's talk a little bit about faith in the traditional sense, religious sense. So when I was pastoring and I was involved in the church, I was very involved with a movement called the faith movement. Was very involved with circles that came out of really two movements that happened in the late 19th century, early 20th century. One most people have never heard of, but it's called the faith cure movement. There was there was a movement of using faith to cure sickness and disease. It was generally pretty extreme. Some of the leaders of that was a guy named A.B. Simpson was part of the faith cure movement. I think A.W. Tozer was part of the faith cure movement. And there were certainly others. Those are just the ones that come to mind right off the bat. And there was a lot of tragic stories that came from people who could have been helped medically, but because they had their faith in the cure and they were depending only on faith, and it really was in that movement, it was seen as a sin. It was seen as going down to Egypt. It was seen as trusting in the arm of the flesh if you used any kind of conventional means for healing. And then in about the 1940s, there was a gentleman by the name of William Branham. William Branham is a fascinating figure, very interesting story. He was uneducated, but incredibly gifted with really psychic abilities. And he started having meetings, and there were tremendous miracles that were happening in his meetings. He would be able to oftentimes bring someone up, and legitimately so. I'm not talking about like, stage magic or mentalism. He was able to, he would see an angel would appear, and an angel would give him information and work with him in his healing ministry. And he was so powerful, so gifted with that oftentimes he could bring someone up that he had never met. He would know their name, sometimes their address, where they lived, what was wrong in their body. And then oftentimes, like I would imagine we read in the Gospels, he would tell them, go home, you've been made well. And so we called that in the church world a word of knowledge, where you can know something about someone that you intuited. And his prophetic gift, in that sense, his psychic gift, if you will, if you prefer that language, was so dynamic. And the healings and the miracles that took place, that was so dynamic that the people that were around him began to believe, some of them, that he was Elijah the prophet coming and heralding the second coming of Christ. And rather than sticking with strictly within the realm of where he was really gifted, which was in psychic healing, really, I think that's how they would describe the phenomena today, probably outside of the church, just looking at the structure of it. And so he began to get off track and started trying to teach the Bible, and he taught all kinds of really gross things. And so as a result, that movement got really, really off track. But other people started to emulate what William Branham was doing. And there was this whole revival movement that happened in the United States, primarily called the Voice of Healing movement. And probably the most prominent figure to come out of the Voice of Healing was a man by the name of Oral Roberts. And Oral Roberts was kind of the first one, at least as far as I can tell, that talked about, giving and receiving, seed faith. If you have a need, plant a seed. And of course, Kenneth Copeland was Oral Roberts' personal pilot. He flew him around to all these different meetings. And then later he came into prominence, and we all know about that. If you don't know about him, you might Google him. There's some really strange stuff around that. And I'm not trying to affiliate. This is just kind of a historical lesson, right? I'm not endorsing any of these people or anything that they did. I'm just saying this is the facts. This is what actually happened. And then churches began to form that began to teach on faith for healing. And this idea was that sickness and disease was part of the fall. It was part of the curse for disobedience. And that Jesus, when he died on the cross, not only did he die for your sins, but he also died for your sicknesses and diseases as well. He carried your sicknesses, he bore your sicknesses, he carried your diseases. They take a verse out of Isaiah 53 that Christians see as a prophetic promise of the atonement. And they start talking about, well, healing was in the atonement. So not only did Jesus atone for your sins and provide for you eternal life, but Jesus also atoned for your sickness and disease so that you could be healed and have wellness in this life. And then, of course, the prosperity movement took it even farther to say that poverty was a curse and that Jesus also bore your poverty. And so they began to take their concept of faith and apply it in all these various different areas. And this, the old saying, if you don't know history, you're doomed to repeat it. So we saw the same kinds of things that would happen in these churches and in this movement that happened in the faith cure movement towards the end of the 19th century and the first part of the 20th century, where people were again doing this either or thing and ended up, when they could have gotten treatment, could have gotten medical treatment and been improved, at least, if not healed, they denied themselves that and put their faith and trust in God. And I'm going to come back to that concept of putting your faith and trust in God and see what we can do with that and how we can look at that going forward, especially those of us that have deconstructed, but are also still desiring, at the very least, some level of spirituality or relationship with spirit in our lives. Then you had Christian Science. I put a few posts up about Christian Science. And again, I think, some people thought, maybe that I was affiliating myself with Christian Science or something like that. Again, that was just more for historical, educational type information, because here's another system of healing started by Mary Baker Eddy that substituted faith and healing for conventional practices and conventional medicine, that kind of thing. And again, we can read and hear about dozens of stories, hundreds of stories, who knows how many, where a Christian Scientist refused medical treatment because of their faith and their beliefs, and it didn't work out so well for them. The one thing that gets ignored, because it creates too much cognitive dissonance for us, the one thing that often gets ignored is that in these systems, there was also healings that took place. There were also miracles that took place. They never would have thought that William Branham was Elijah the prophet, this great fulfillment of ancient prophecies, if he wasn't delivering the goods on some level in his meetings. And the same for all these other sort of healing evangelists. Definitely true in Christian Science. For every nightmare story tragic story that we can hear about or that we can read about, there are also other stories where people received miraculous results, miraculous healing, miraculous outcomes in their lives. Another movement that was really popular, even more popular than any of the Christian ones that I've referenced, that had a much, much larger impact upon our society, that was also happening in the 20th century, is known as New Thought. So New Thought was similar to Christian Science. New Thought was a lot of it, most of it, most of the teachers of New Thought rooted their ideas in the scriptures, in the teachings of Jesus, in the Bible, and all that stuff. Neville Goddard is someone that was part of the New Thought movement who's very popular today. I'm trying to think the other guy. Ernest Holmes, someone else who's very popular. There are still churches of divine science, often confused with Christian Science, but something completely different. Again, Mary Baker Eddy was the founder of Christian Science. Ernest Holmes was the founder of the divine science movement. So a lot of Unitarian churches, a lot of divine science churches were rooted in this New Thought ideology. The other thing, though, that was rooted in New Thought ideology was the entire concept of the power of positive thinking that created its own industry, sort of in its own, the industry of self-help grew up out of that. So people like Louise Hay, Hay House Publishers, making positive affirmations, all of this was the result of New Thought thinking and New Thought philosophies. And that's why I said it had a much bigger impact. Not only did it have more followers and a bigger impact at the height than anything in Christianity or the charismatic movement, but it also shaped culture so that still today we are feeling the effects and the impact of this, even though it's not being taught from the scriptures or from any kind of a religious or necessarily spiritual perspective like it was in New Thought to begin with. But then here's another aspect. Louise Hay wrote a really good book. I've read Louise Hay's books. This is not a criticism at all of Louise Hay. I think she was a real gift for us. But she wrote a book on how to heal your life. And she applies a lot of these principles of faith, of positive affirmation, in order to produce healing results. Today, we have people like Joe Dispenza. If you go to a Joe Dispenza conference, he's certainly not religious. He avoids religious talk at all costs. He talks about the energy centers in the body, but he won't refer to them as chakras because he doesn't want what he's doing. He wants what he's doing to be really rooted in pragmatism, in science, and not at all associated with any particular specific religious or spiritual path, but the principles are still the same. He's written books like The Habit of Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself, The Habit of Breaking Yourself. Some of us are in the habit of breaking ourselves. That's what I almost said. No, the title of his book is Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself. And if you go in there, there's going to be a lot of positive thinking. There's going to be a lot of changing your mindset. There's going to be a lot of imagining the outcome and this sort of thing. That's the whole concept behind breaking the habit of being yourself. So there's an element of faith there. A couple decades ago, there was a documentary that was made called The Secret, and that kind of put the law of attraction on everybody's radar. And so the law of attraction, just think positively, think about the outcome, imagine the outcome that you want to receive. Very similar to the way faith was taught in Christian Science, the way faith was taught in New Thought, and the way faith was taught in the churches that were more fundamentalist. Same concepts, same principles. It's just that in the church, it was married to a lot of religious dogma, religious dogma that many of us have rejected. So a lot of people have deconstructed and left the church, and they've followed people like Joe Dispenza, or they've gone back, and you can find just hundreds and hundreds of videos about Neville Goddard and people in the New Thought movement that's very, very popular today. And excuse me, all of these things have an element of faith to them. Then you have the cynics and the skeptics. You have the people that they're just bitter or angry or just convinced and fully persuaded that all spirituality or all religion is garbage. And those people tend then to gravitate towards atheism. They tend to gravitate towards far left thinking in terms of their political positions. It's almost like a full-on rejection of anything that they had. A lot of these, if they deconstructed from Christianity, a full-on rejection of all of it. And they think they're taking a healthier view of it, but they really aren't. What they're doing is what we call in psychology operating from a reaction formation. So reaction formation would be you're raised in a very strict home. As a child, you had a very strict curfew. You were limited on how many friends you could have, what you could do, very authoritarian parents. And so when you look back on your childhood, you look back on your upbringing, it just brings you pain. And so oftentimes from the place of a reaction formation, when those people became parents, they became very permissive. They got into gentle parenting. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with gentle parenting. Don't take me wrong. I'm just saying it's swinging the pendulum, if you will, the other direction. So their kids sometimes lack structure. They lack rules. They lack the guidance that they need in a healthy family where there's an exercise of healthy authority, but because it was so painful for them, they just reject it altogether. And that's what I see a lot of people doing, is just moving from a place, really not leading from a place of life-giving substance, but leading from a place of reaction to what was, constantly reacting to what Christians are doing or what they experienced in their religious upbringing and stuff like that. And that's why I felt the need to move myself away from that, because I was also stuck in a reaction formation. And through this last year, as I've been through this process that I've been through in this last year, that was one of the things that I got healed of. I got healed of the way I thought about and looked back on my experiences in Christianity and in the faith, and have attempted in the last couple of months to pivot away from that and move towards something that's more positive and more life-giving. So what about faith, or faith in God? See, here's the problem. Oh, wait, let me cover this too. Another way that people look at faith is simply a philosophy. They confuse faith with philosophy. In other words, in these other movements that I've been talking about, faith was always connected to an outcome. If you believe in Jesus and that he died for your sins, then you can, by faith, appropriate what he did and go to heaven when you die because all your sins are forgiven. And then they came along and said, well, healing's also in the atonement. So if you believe that Jesus bore your sicknesses and carried your diseases, and if you believe in Jesus as a healer, then you appropriate that to your life and you'll experience that in this life. All of that's tied to what I would call expectant faith. My faith is expecting to produce some kind of a result for me, whether it be after I die and I go to heaven, or it's going to produce a result for me in that my body will be healed if I believe hard enough or appropriate what I think Jesus did on the cross. Doctrinal faith is not that at all. It's a philosophical faith. It's not really connected to or tied to any kind of outcome. Belief in the Trinity would be a good example of this. Belief in the virgin birth would be a good example of this. Belief in a historical Jesus would even be a good example of this. And all of that is just ideas. The Trinity is a philosophical idea. It's not tied to any outcome. People, I don't know of anyone that says you have to, any group ever that said, if you don't, that the way you appropriate any kind of expectant faith for salvation, for heaven, is simply by believing in the Trinity. Trinitarian statements are statements about the nature of reality. Original sin is merely a statement about the nature of reality. There's no expectancy tied to it. So that's another area where we get confused with faith. Now, where faith became a problem was that a lot of this expectant faith teaching hasn't worked for people. There's a lot of people that were trying to believe God for healing and never got healed. People that were sowing their seed because they had a need and believing God for finances to come back, and finances never came back. That's within the church. Outside the church, there have been a lot of people that have tried the law of attraction. And at best, sometimes it's worked and sometimes it hasn't worked for them. At the end of the day, as far as I can tell, the one thing that this all has in common, and this is where I want to get into reframing faith. The one thing that this all has in common is it's primarily an intellectual exercise. If I can mentally assent, if I can give mental assent to a God that I believe in, and that God will respond to my mental assent by giving me the results that I want, by giving me the outcomes that I want, that's generally how it is. Now, for people that don't believe in God, but maybe they practice positive affirmation or the law of attraction, the idea is if I can imagine the outcome, if I can give mental assent to the outcome, if I can affirm the outcome, if I can get rid of my old ways of thinking, then the universe will give me what I'm looking for. So there's always this idea of something or somebody. If I raise my vibration, then I'll vibrate with the thing, whatever that means, right? If I could raise my vibration to the level that I'm vibrating with the thing that I want, then the law of resonance will bring the thing that I want to me. I will attract it to me. Now, that's all happening in the mental realm. That's also limiting. I'm not saying we shouldn't do those things. I'm not against any of that stuff at all. I'm just trying to point out that it's all happening up here. That's the first thing. And the second thing is it's all based on some kind of exchange. It's all based on a sort of spiritual economic system. If you have enough money in the bank to go buy a house, then you can buy a house that's value matches the money that you have in the bank. Or if you buy a car or anything that you buy, right? You have to have enough money to exchange, because that's all money is an exchange. So I'm exchanging my money, which is really a representation of my energy, for whatever it is that I want. And it's a question of whether or not I can afford it. And interestingly enough, if you really think about it, a lot of the way people have applied faith or thought about faith, or the way faith has been taught, has been based on this same kind of economic system. But instead of the exchange being money, the exchange is having enough belief, having enough affirmation, having enough mental assent, having a high enough vibration. If your vibration's too low for the thing you want, you can't exchange your vibration for it. If God's looking at you and God expects you to have faith in order to answer your prayer, then you have to have enough faith and you have to give it or direct it towards God. And if God is pleased with that and thinks you did enough, then God will give it back to you. It's constantly based on exchanges. The difference is that when you go to purchase something with money, the exchange rate is very clear. This meal is going to cost you at, this, let's just make it, I don't go to Starbucks, but this Starbucks cup of coffee is going to cost you $8. It's hard to believe that people are paying $8 for fancy coffee, but no condemnation. I was there once too. That's what it's worth. So I know what it's worth. I know what I have to have. If I only have $6 and I don't have access to anything else, any other form of credit or anything like that, then I don't have enough to get the cup of coffee. And the barista knows that, and I know that. And it's very well defined. But when it comes to operating in faith, whether it's the law of attraction or raising your vibration, or whether it's some form of religious faith, the exchange rate is pretty murky, pretty muddy in there. There were times in my own experience with healing and ministering to other people, there were times when I thought faith was at an all-time high, not just with myself, but with the other people as well. And the person didn't get what they wanted. They didn't get the outcome. The person died. In a couple cases that I can think of, 2 or 3, the person died. And you look back on that and you say, well, maybe it was a lack of faith. But that really didn't seem to hold up. And yet there were other times where people had no faith at all. I shared an example yesterday where a young man was completely miraculously healed instantaneously. And there was such lack of faith that the family refused, just downright refused the evidence in front of them. They refused their own eyes because that would have been impossible. There's no way that could have actually happened. Something's going on here. That's where cynicism, skepticism can be such a thief in our lives and rob us from things that are good for us and healthy for us and helpful for us. So how then can we think about faith? Because then the other thing that happens is there's so much pressure, right? There's so much pressure in all these things. Because if I have doubts, then I'm not going to get the thing that I want. And in a lot of cases, when we're talking about law of attraction and stuff, or we say you're creating your own reality, then that's great when we're trying to manifest a new car or a new job or a physical healing. But what happens when tragedy strikes? What happens when horrible things happen to us in our life, traumatic things happen to us in our lives? Then we attracted those as well. Based on this way of thinking and this way of looking at this stuff, we attracted those things as well. So, all right, I've had people tell me that it's helpful for them that have been through a lot of trauma, and it was helpful for them to come to the place where they understood that they attracted that to themselves. They've told me that way of thinking has been helpful for them. Or this idea that we set all of this up ahead of time before we come into this incarnation, and that we planned for the hardships and the traumas and the tragedies in our lives so that we could learn and grow as a soul. And I've had people tell me that's extremely helpful for them. And yet at the same time, I have, because I'm a counselor and I deal a lot with trauma, I've had a lot of people who were really victimized in relationships, really abused in relationships. And one of the struggles that they have is, and this is really true, one of the struggles that they have is actually placing the appropriate level of blame and responsibility on the perpetrator or perpetrators. And so they sit there and think to themselves, I must have caused this. I must have done something wrong. I'm responsible for this in some way. And the reason they're doing this is not because it's logical, and it's not because it's true, but it is, at least at the level of healing or not healing, or wellness, level of wellness or lack of wellness that they're at, it's more empowering. It makes the world a less scary place, and they feel more empowered if they had some responsibility, then at least they have some control, and that's helpful and beneficial for them. So just because an idea is helpful or an idea is beneficial in a moment or when you're at a certain level of wellness does not mean that idea is substantial. And by substantial, I mean that does not mean that does not make that idea true, nor does that make that idea the most helpful or resourceful idea for you to achieve the next level of wellness. Oftentimes, to get to the next level or to get to complete healing, there has to be an acceptance that, yes, I was victimized. No, I didn't do anything to bring this into my life. I wasn't responsible for this. And there's an emotional release and a level of health and well-being that can come when a person comes into that level of thinking and reframing about their trauma and about their situation. So there's all of that, but that's the problem with it. So then here going forward, so it might be helpful. Here's the thing. It might be helpful. Maybe you've had tragedy in your life and maybe you've said, I must have planned that ahead of time. And that's helpful for you. No problem with that. maybe you buy into this idea that you are all that is and everything that you need for life, and because you are divine and you are God. And if that's true, and then you have tragedy, and then you must have been responsible for that. You must have created that. And if it's helpful for you to believe that, then um, then that's fine. That's all dealing with past stuff. What about when you go forward? Because here's what can happen to people when they go forward. When they go forward with that idea that I'm creating this, I'm causing this, my faith or my fear or my lack of faith is causing these things to happen because I'm this sort of all-powerful genie that's going around, then what can happen is you become afraid of your own fear. You fear your own fear. You become worried about your own doubts. You become worried about your own worry, worried about your negative thinking, which just adds more worry, more fear, and more negative thinking to the pile. In other words, it works like this. If I'm really afraid of something that could potentially happen to me, and I worry about it and put my focus there, then I'm creating it. I'm manifesting it. I'm attracting it to myself. And so then that can lead to this suppression and repression. Oh, I'm just going to hide my fear. I'm just going to suppress my fear. I'm just going to dump my fear. And it just puts you in, it can put you in a very paralyzed and unresourceful state. Because when you add fear to fear, your body is neurologically wired. When you get to a certain level of stress, you get to a certain level of anxiety, you get to a certain level of worry and fear, to shut down. All right, so how can we reframe all of this stuff? And I talked about this in my class, so I'm just going to talk about it briefly for the rest of our time. And there's two things that we can look at. The first one is something called outcome expectancy. Now, this is just psychology. There's nothing spiritual about this. There is nothing religious about this. This is just psychology. And it's pretty self-evident when you think about it. An outcome expectancy is what you expect to happen in the future in any given situation. And we do this all the time. When I get in my car, and I'm going to the grocery store, I have a certain outcome expectancy that know the route to take, and I'm going to make it to the grocery store, and I'm expecting that the grocery store is going to have the thing that I need. That's outcome expectancy. If you're looking forward to something, a party, a concert, time with friends or family, a vacation, you have a certain level of outcome expectancy. You're expecting a certain outcome, and it's those outcome expectancies that cause you to take action. So we do this all the time. The problem is when there is no outcome expectancy at all, then that can create for people feelings of hopelessness. I don't have hope that I'm going to get the thing that I want. I don't believe it's going to happen. I don't believe that it's possible. When there's no outcome expectancy, the emotional response to that for most people is hopelessness. Now, there is a level of no outcome expectancy where I don't know what to expect. I don't know what to anticipate, but it's life-giving and it's positive. It doesn't lead to this hopeless state that just brings you down and causes you not to take action. It's more like I'm ready to be surprised. It comes more from a sense of wonder, a sense of I want to be surprised, a sense of adventure, right? I'm not talking about that kind of no outcome expectancy. That's actually a form of faith. I'm talking about when there's no outcome expectancy and you become hopeless. And this happens lots of times with people who get a prognosis regarding a certain physical condition or disease that they may have. There is an outcome expectancy that the medical community has for whatever condition you have based on the treatment that you're about to receive. That's just how medicine is practiced. The problem is that these outcome expectancies are based on published studies that have been rigorously done, that have been published in journals. The problem with that is most of us, I would venture to guess, have never even been approached or asked to participate in a medical study or signed up for one. And if we have, we probably haven't done it a lot. And let's say that we have, maybe we've done it more than once, more than one time. Did that study ever pass through the peer review process and all of the rigorous stuff that happens after you participate in the study in order to get published? And if it got published, that's still just one study. Were there other studies that had better results or refuted the study that you participated in? Because so what I'm saying is you get down to a very, very, very small sampling of people that have the same condition or the same problem that you have, and they create an algorithm based on a statistical analysis of the people only in those groups. So anytime a person gets healed of something, regardless of how they got there, if they weren't participating in a study, they're not included in those statistics. And so it's a false narrative in a sense when it comes to the outcome expectancy that is established when a doctor or a medical professional gives you a prognosis. Does that make sense? So, but what's happening is we can allow the prognosis in any situation to inform and frame and set the frame for us for our outcome expectancy. This particular condition is incurable. You'll have to deal with this the rest of your life. We can't cure it, but we can treat the symptoms with medication, whatever the case may be. That's just in physical health. But there's other things as well. Believing it can be as simple, like for college students, I work with college students who don't think they have the ability to perform well on tests. And so their outcome expectancy is that they're going to fail the test. Their outcome expectancy is they can't make it through college. Their outcome expectancy is I can't get that good of a high-paying job. I have an outcome expectancy when it comes to working with technology that has left me hopeless a lot of times. So if we shed ourselves of all the stuff that we've heard and thought about faith, and we simply look at it from the perspective of having an outcome expectancy of possibility, having a genuine outcome expectancy of possibility, that's where it starts. So you can almost say that that's hope. I'm hoping this is possible. It's possible for this to happen for me in my life. That's really all you have to believe. You don't have to believe in a God. You don't have to believe in the universe. You don't have to believe in the power of positive thinking. But if you don't have the right kind of outcome expectancy, the end result for you is going to be an emotional state of hopelessness. Now, there's another component to this that I talked about yesterday. It's another psychological term that's called self-efficacy. Efficacy comes from the word effective. So how effective can I be at this? That's what self-efficacy is. Just a fancy term for, do I think I can do this or do I not think I can do this? So there are people who can manage the outcome expectancy part of something and say, absolutely, it's possible to be healed. Absolutely, it's possible to improve a relationship. Absolutely, it's possible to win the lottery, right? That's good. But if you don't attach self-efficacy to it, then what you'll say is it's possible that this outcome could happen. It just won't happen for me. In other words, this is the state of mind where I believe it happened for other people, or I believe it can happen for other people. I just don't believe that it can happen for me. You exclude yourself. We exclude ourselves from the possibility. We accept that it's a possibility. We just exclude ourselves from the idea or the belief that we can experience that possibility. Self-efficacy, or lack thereof, rather, lack of self-efficacy, leads to a sense of powerlessness. It creates an emotional state of powerlessness within us. So if we combine the two, if we have no outcome expectancy and we have no self-efficacy, then we're stuck in states of hopelessness and helplessness. That's a deadly combination. So people who are stuck in hopelessness and people who are stuck in helplessness invariably, almost always, if not always, do nothing about their situation. This is where procrastination comes in. This is where despair comes in. This is where depression comes in. This is where I don't take the action that I could be taking in order to influence an outcome in a favorable way for my future. When I have no outcome expectancy and I have no self-efficacy, then in reality, what I'm doing is I'm setting up a worse situation for my future self. Whatever problems you don't handle and confront today will grow and be handed off to a future version of yourself to have to deal with. At some point, you're going to have to deal with it. It's just a question of whether it's going to be this present self that deals with it or the future self that deals with it. And because outcome expectancy has to do with the future and our vision of the future, and self-efficacy combined with outcome expectancy has to do with the vision of the version of our future self that we are projecting mentally, then we're not going to do anything. In which case, our present self is not benefiting to our future self. In fact, our present self is actually harming our future self. So we end up engaging in forms of self-harm without even realizing it. So what I'm suggesting, and this is where visualization can help. This is where affirmation can help. Faith is not the same thing as visualizing a positive outcome. And faith is not the same thing as making a positive affirmation. What those things are doing is helping you build a framework of faith so that you can take action based on a sense of, based on a positive outcome expectancy and a healthy sense of self-efficacy. So you might be coming to faith. So I think it's helpful to redefine for ourselves, to reframe for ourselves faith in those simple terms. All faith is that I congruently, both thinking and feeling and acting in a certain way based on a positive outcome expectancy. And I believe that by taking action and by doing some things, I can influence the situation. I can influence the outcome in a favorable way to give myself the best possibility of experiencing that outcome. I think this is super important, because then it's not this magical thing where I'm praying to God, trying to convince God that I believe, and then thinking, well, why didn't God give that to me? Maybe that wasn't the will of God. Or visualizing something, thinking that somehow you're communicating with the universe through that visualization, through that process of visualization, or by making positive affirmations and outcomes. This is all part of the process. It's just important to break down the process and realize when I'm making those positive affirmations, I'm building within myself a sense of self-efficacy. That's what I'm doing to build self-efficacy. If I didn't believe in the possibility that I could have self-efficacy, I wouldn't be doing the affirmations or the visualizations. So I'm not saying it doesn't work. The problem is that people think that that's the whole thing. And they put all this pressure on themselves, or they get excited about it and they meditate on something and they think about something and they create a positive outcome in their mind and they're making positive affirmations and they're doing these things. And then it doesn't happen the way that they expected, or it doesn't happen as soon as they expect it to happen. Or in a lot of cases, the situation appears to get worse or the exact opposite of what I was expecting didn't happen. And it's in those times, it's in those moments that oftentimes people slip back into no outcome expectancy. I knew that wouldn't work for me, or I knew that wouldn't work. I knew that was all BS. Or self-efficacy. Well, I know it works for others, but for some reason, I just can't ever get it to work for me. Other people have spiritual experiences, but I've just never been able to have one. And they slip back into lack of or no outcome expectancy and no self-efficacy, no sense that it can happen for them. And so guess what? Now they're doing nothing. I knew that wouldn't work, and they give it up. I knew it wouldn't work for me, and they give it up. And so now it's not working because you're not working it. So I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. I've just been thinking about this lately because when I got out of the hospital, my prognosis was not good. My diagnosis was not good. My outcome, but I had to really strive to change my outcome expectancy, to say, no, returning to total health is possible. And returning to total health is possible for me. That was the mental engine that kept me going and doing the things that I needed to do to achieve the level of wellness that I have today. That doesn't mean that I didn't have episodes of fear. That doesn't mean that I didn't have really days where I got down. That doesn't mean that there weren't days where I didn't think it could happen, or I didn't think it could happen for me. There were those days. There were those times that did nothing whatsoever to sabotage the outcome or sabotage the process. See, the problem is when I think I'm not believing hard enough, I'm not believing strongly enough, I've got some doubt, I've got some fear, I've got some worry. And that worry, that doubt, that fear, that disbelief is sabotaging that future outcome. So while we're trying to have faith, but yet at the same time we have doubt, it's working internally on our outcome expectancy and can cause us, because I think, oh no, I have fear, I have worry. Oh no, I'm going to manifest that. I better stop that. I'm going to manifest that. It's not really that deep. You can think about it as simple as, if I keep thinking this way, I'm going to get myself stuck in hopelessness. If I keep imagining and worrying like this, I'm going to get myself stuck in helplessness, and I'm not going to take action. So instead of, telling people, well, you have to have faith. Well, you do have to have faith, but it depends on what you mean by faith. You have to have faith that when you go to the grocery store, that they're going to have the item that you want. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. I remember I was going down to the local dollar store just to get some creamer for the coffee. They always carry it. And I walk in and there's a sign up that says they're having electrical problems. And because they were having electrical problems that were affecting their refrigeration and freezer units, they had no cold. They had nothing that could be stored or kept cold. So they didn't have cheese, cottage cheese, milk. They didn't have any dairy products at all. So even though my outcome expectancy, my faith was, well, I'll just drive down to the corner store and get it. And it wasn't there. It's highly unusual. But you can see I was still operating in faith, the belief that it would be there. Oh, all of a sudden now it's not there. See, it's not always definite. So then I have to decide, how bad do I want the creamer? Do I want to drive another 15 minutes to get to the grocery store? Or do I want to just go back to my house and have coffee without creamer? It's a simple example. It's a simple everyday example. What I'm trying to get you to see is we do this all day, every day. Where we don't do it is when we're facing problems that have significance to us, especially emotional significance in our lives. When we're facing a health problem, it has emotional significance. When we're facing a financial problem, it definitely has emotional significance. When we're having problems with the boss, people at work, or in our family with family members, it has emotional significance. And that emotional significance impacts our outcome expectancy because the stakes are higher, right? So I can go to the grocery store because there's not a huge emotional investment, even though I am addicted to coffee with creamer. There's no emotional significance to it. So I can go down the store or go back home. When we have a higher level of emotional significance in our outcome expectancy, and we meet with delays or we meet with obstacles, then we end up thinking, crap, it didn't work. They didn't have it. We go home. Well, they didn't have it. It didn't work. It didn't happen. That stuff doesn't work. And we quit. We give up. We go, and in the analogy, we go home from the store empty-handed. When we could have, if we'd kept our outcome expectancy up, adjusted our strategy to get that outcome, because we stay out of hopelessness and we stay out of helplessness. All right. I hope that was helpful and beneficial to you today. I'll go back and look at some of the comments. If you're watching by replay, I really appreciate you watching by replay. I am going to be making some changes probably to how I'm creating and doing content. I've more or less been doing this as a hobby for the last few years, and I'm getting much more serious about it now. I've already produced 2 classes that have been recorded, and I want to do more content for YouTube. I want to be more intentional. I've got a couple books that I'm working on, so I may be not be doing as much of the I may be changing Sunday morning lives. I haven't decided for sure yet, but I may not be doing Sunday morning lives in the future. Haven't decided that yet for sure. Just trying to manage expectations for outcomes. I will definitely be with you next week, and next couple of weeks I'll let you know what I'll be transitioning to. I'm thinking about engaging in other social media platforms. I am trying to learn technology so I can get better at it, and I'm getting some help from some people so we can, so hopefully I can make more content available to more people. So give me some feedback. Let me know. I'm inviting feedback. I'm soliciting feedback. So I would love to know your thoughts and feelings about it. And if you want to support us, you can support us by going to PayPal. We have PayPal, we have Cash App, we have Square, and I can put that information. I can put that information. Maybe I'll go back and edit the title or something, put that information out there for you. Again, if you're watching by YouTube, you want to get in touch with me, aarontomlinson@gmail.com. I get tons of emails. Sometimes I miss them, but I will try to be alert and get back with you if you reach out to me. Appreciate all the support. Appreciate all love and support from everybody. And I will definitely be with you this time next week. Thanks, everybody.